many of you have been involved in ICCA, GCIA in the past. Hunt was one of the speakers at one of our events in the last couple of years. And it was that inside story of what's happening within our government and within Washington, D.C. And especially he talked a lot about how the effects of what government's doing affects our industry, especially with farm bills and other things like that. So we're happy to have him on. He'll be talking when we get to the Q&A area about some of those things as a food expert within this world. Todd Webster is a principal at Cornerstone, and he's so they're a public affairs firm. You guys probably saw that in the introductions. In Washington, D.C., you have a variety of clients. They do all kinds of different businesses, some of which are food and many are travel related and other things like that. So we're really happy to have you here today. We got Jim Richards, who's a principal and managing director, and that's the same titles that Hunt has within Cornerstone. And I think what's really interesting here, and we've done this in the past at our events, and I love it. So we have, one person. So Jim will take the Republican side, and Todd will take the Democratic side. And even though they're within the same company and they're representing different kinds of clients, and they're actually working different parts of Congress, it's kind of interesting to get their views and what they're dealing with every day, and especially this close to Election Day and what's going on. We rarely get involved in the political world within our associations, but I didn't think there's a better time to do this than there is right now. So we're really happy to get you guys here. And then we've got Brad Nelson, who's the VP Global Culinary and Food and Beverage Portfolio for Marriott International. So Brad, thanks for being here. Brad's been involved with us for many, many years and has been on some of our immersions. And so we're really happy to have you here to talk about your industry, which is challenging to say the least. but there's.
I'm very interested to hear to hear Jim and Todd though. So thankful to be here.
Yeah, and of course, Brad, they're based out of Washington, D.C., so his take on what's happening there, too. They're, of course, involved in a lot of these areas as well. But also, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening within the culinary scene within D.C. as well, which is, quite, I would assume it's quite interesting because of the nature of Washington in itself, and especially this time of the year and this particular year. And then you see Mike Speltz. We have Mike on here. Mike will be running some videos throughout this to kind of mirror what's happening and what people are talking about. But to get this rolling, let's start with Todd and Jim. And do we toss a coin to see who goes first, or is somebody going to volunteer?
I'll jump on that hand grenade, Kevin, and that way Todd can formulate his responses well in advance, because he's going to probably need a little time to do that. So, from the Republican side of the aisle, it's an interesting year. The old Confucian curse is in full effect right now, which is, may you live in interesting times. I'll touch quickly on the House, then my take on the Senate, and then close out with my take on the presidential, which is the most Confucian curse of all, and definitely the most interesting of times. So on the House side, Republicans have to get 17 seats net in order to get the gavel back and presumably make Kevin McCarthy the speaker. It's an uphill battle for them. I'll be the first to admit that. I will tell you that you're seeing lots of political prognostications that the Democrats are going to gain seats in the House. I see it quite a bit different, actually. As a matter of fact, right now, there are 17 Republican challengers against Democrat incumbents that are up or tied in the polls. In addition, there are 17 what we call young guns, which is those Republican challengers that have met certain criteria that outraised their Democrat opponents in the end of the third quarter and in their first pre-primary filings with the FEC. So at the end of the day, is it a big leap for the Republicans to gather the House back? As much as I hate to admit it, yes. And I'm a House guy. It's an institution I'm quite fond of. But there's a chance, and it really is going to depend on what happens on Tuesday as far as the turnout on the Republican side. And if there's a big Trump win, which is not what any pollster that you're talking to will tell you is going to happen, then there's going to be some coattails for him. So stay tuned on that. Right now, I would probably put the net gain in the House at 8 to 12 seats for Republicans, which would make Nancy Pelosi Speaker again, assuming that she runs for the Speaker again, which I would bet money on. And she will have as miserable a job as John Boehner used to have when he was Speaker, and Paul Ryan had when he was Speaker, because that narrow majority is problematic, particularly when you've got the AOC crowd, and then you've got those Democrats that are in Republican or Republican-leaning seats, and their priorities are substantially different. So stay tuned on that. But if the Democrats gain seats in the House, then I'll buy Todd dinner and a bottle of wine at a place of his choosing. On the Senate races, it's a little bit more interesting. Republicans are on the defensive, much more so than the Democrats are. We'll start off on the three Republican opportunities that exist out there. The first of which is Alabama. Doug Jones is the incumbent. Tommy Tuberville, the former Auburn coach, is running against Senator Jones, and is up 12 to 14 points. That seat's going to flip back to Republican next Tuesday. Matter of fact, Hunt and I have hosted a couple of fundraisers for Coach Tuberville early on, and then you go up to Michigan, and John James is running against Gary Peters. Peters is ahead in the polls, but some of the internal polling that we're hearing about shows that John James and Peters are about even. And James is doing really well in Detroit, and part of that is the fact that Detroit has a large African American community. James happens to be a former West Point graduate and Apache helicopter pilot who is African American. Matter of fact, his classmate at West Point, Wesley Hunt, is running to reclaim a Republican seat in Houston. So you could have two Black former West Point graduates and Apache helicopter pilots in this next Congress. And the other seat that is a potential play for Republicans is Senator Tina Smith in Minnesota. Jason Lewis, former member of the House and talk show host, is just outside the margin of error on the polling against Senator Smith. So those are the three that are in play. Now on the Senate side, for the Republicans, a little bit different. Cory Gardner, who is a personal friend of Hunt and mine's from Colorado, is probably on the way out. Minus a major miracle on Tuesday, he's got severe headwinds running against him. Martha McSally in Arizona is in a tough race against Mark Kelly, former astronaut and the husband of former Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. But Senator McSally's numbers have been moving the right direction. She's now tied on internal polls, and Trump is moving the right direction in Arizona as well. So there's a hope that they will carry her across the finish line. Then you've got two races in Georgia that are problematic for Republicans, one of which, maybe two of which, go to a runoff on January 5th. So we may not know who controls the Senate until January 5th, given those two likely runoffs. One is going to be a runoff, and the other may be Senator Perdue's seat. South Carolina is a tough seat, and then Maine, Susan Collins in Todd's home state. Matter of fact, I think Todd's going up there to try and help beat her this weekend, and I hope he fails miserably. But is in a tough race. But Susan Collins, they've never been able to knock her out, and I'll believe she's been knocked out when we see the results. That takes us over into the presidential, which is really interesting. You've got the tweeter in chief, who is prolific and tireless in his work ethics. He's speaking in Arizona right now. And then you've got his opponent, former Vice President Joe Biden, who is very good with teleprompters and not taking any questions from the press, and hiding in his basement past anything past 10 o'clock in the morning. So it's the most unusual campaign in the history of presidential politics. If you'd have told me that this was coming about this way, then I'd ask what you've been smoking that was legal in Colorado. So when you look at this presidential race, it's going to go down the wire. You're going to hear a lot of talk about the huge early turnout, and it's substantial. There's going to be a spike in voting overall compared to 2016. The thing that you're seeing on the data on that huge early turnout, though, is that a substantial portion of that is Democrats that normally vote on Election Day that, because of COVID, are voting early and absentee. And Republicans have a propensity to vote on Election Day. So you're going to see that turnout spike. And you recall that in 2016, President Trump won the Electoral College with 306 electoral votes, but he lost the popular vote by almost 2 points. and 2.8 million votes. What you don't hear about 2016 is that Clinton won the 4 biggest states, California, Texas, New York, and Florida, by a combined 5.2 million votes. So she racked up big numbers in 2 states that were going in the Democratic column to begin with. Some of those dynamics exist again. Michigan and Pennsylvania and Florida are once again the key states. If Trump loses Florida, and you'll know that relatively early on Tuesday night, then he's more than likely lost the election. Done. Over. He wins Florida, it's going to be a long night, and we could see it well extend into the day. COVID has had a huge impact on not only the economy, but electoral politics, and we're seeing it again by the vice president and his love for his basement. So stay tuned. At the end of the day, I'm going to make a forecast that the Senate Republicans lose 1 seat net, and that President Trump is reelected with a plurality of the vote. And the Electoral College, again, goes to about 306 electoral votes for President Trump. And Vice President Biden can then fully retire for the final time. And that's my quick take. I know Todd is teed up and ready to go and has an exact contrary position on every single thing that I just said. And we'll see on Tuesday who's right.
I love it. And we have some questions already, but I'm going to wait until Todd is done to bring some of those questions to you guys. But Todd, you're on.
Thank you very much. And thanks to my colleague, Jim. I love Jim Richards, but I would much rather be Todd Webster right now than Jim Richards. Why would I rather be Todd Webster than Jim Richards? Well, because all of the trending factors, all the momentum, all of the opportunity right now is on the Democratic side. Jim talked about turnout, and turnout is truly stunning. Right now, as of today, let's back up. There are 330 million Americans in this country. In 2016, about 140 million people voted. As of today, 72 million people have already voted. 72 million people have already voted as of today. That is more than 50% of the vote total of 2016. So the 2016 vote total already as of today, half of that number have already voted. Now, if you look at some of these states where there was the most enthusiasm and most excitement, as of today in the state of Texas, 87% of the 2016 turnout has already voted in the state of Texas. 7.8 million Texans have already cast their ballots. In Florida, 67% of the 2016 turnout has already voted, about 6 million voters. In the state of Georgia, another spot where if you had said 12 months ago that Donald Trump would be fearing to lose Georgia, a state that no Democratic presidential candidate has won since 1992, they would have thought that you're smoking something that's now legal in Colorado and a number of other states. So that is the enthusiasm right now, and the turnout and the energy right now. Yes, a lot of them are Democrats voting early. A lot of them are seniors who have been infected with COVID. Or are afraid that they're infected with COVID. So you're seeing tremendous energy, tremendous enthusiasm. Right now at the presidential level right now, and this has been stable for the last 6 months, people look at the comparison between 2020 and 2016, right? In 2016, Donald Trump surprised everybody, shocked the world, and beat Hillary Clinton. So what are the main differences between 2020 and 2016? In 2020, there has been about 3 to 5% of the electorate who have been undecided for the last 6 months. In 2016, that number was about 8 to 10%. So it's a far smaller percent of undecided voters, and that's been consistent for the last 6 months. That's point one. Point two is that Joe Biden has had a stubborn and a persistent national lead for the last 6 months of about 7 to 9 points, and that has been consistent. No matter what happens through the debates, through the conventions. So a smaller undecided percentage, a persistent lead for Biden, not only at the national level, but in the key battleground states. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then I think the third sort of major factor in Biden's column right now is that Biden does significantly better with senior citizens than Hillary Clinton did. And why does that matter? Because as we know, the over 65 vote is the most consistent, the most reliable, the most enthusiastic, the most regular voters. And Trump won them in 2016, and Biden is winning them significantly now. So Biden does better with senior citizens because they know him, they like him, they trust him, they are comfortable with him, they've known him for 30 years. But furthermore, 47 years. But even before, apart from the fact that they know and they like and they trust Joe Biden, Donald Trump has disastrously mismanaged the COVID response. The COVID is now back spiking again throughout the country. 226 million Americans have died. Predominantly, they have been older Americans, folks who either have ill health or are older. And of course, the tragedy is that these people are isolated. They can't see their children or their families to be comforted in the hospital. And yes, the virus did originate in China, but since February and March, we've been told that it's going to disappear and dry up by summertime, and that Trump took no responsibility for it. And if the first responsibility of any president is to keep the country safe, Donald Trump has disastrously failed that test. So that's at the presidential level. Right now, the easiest path for Joe Biden to win the presidency is to win the Hillary Clinton states, the states that Hillary Clinton won, plus win Michigan, win Pennsylvania, and win Wisconsin. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Currently, in the Biden campaign's own polling, he is up by 7 points in Pennsylvania. He is up by 7 points in Wisconsin. He's up by 9 points in Michigan. So that is the map. That is the reality, and that doesn't include Florida, where the Biden campaign's own polling has him up by 2 points in Florida. That doesn't include, and Florida is, if Joe Biden wins Florida, and again, as Jim pointed out, we'll know that pretty early on election night, then the game is over. There is no universe in which Donald Trump can win the presidency without winning Florida. There are pathways for Joe Biden to win without Florida. But the fact that Biden himself is now campaigning in Georgia and campaigning in Iowa, a state that Trump won by 10 points, shows the volatility of this election and shows how weak Donald Trump is. That Joe Biden's team and Joe Biden's campaign is on offense. They are advertising in these red states that Trump won, whereas Trump is now traveling to states where he is just trying to defend himself and trying to protect and trying to win back the same states that he won. I think the other major piece of this, and this gets to the momentum advantage, is the fact that the Biden campaign is raising dramatically more money than the Trump campaign. In just the last quarter, the Biden campaign raised more than 3 times the amount of money that the Trump campaign raised. Biden has been outspending Trump by a 2-to-1 margin, and that Biden has nearly 3 times the cash on hand advantage that the Trump campaign does, which is stunning because the Trump folks had raised $1 billion, and somehow they frittered that away over the last year through either cars for their campaign manager or however else they did it, through fundraising expenses or through throwing fundraisers at the Trump Hotel. So again, there's a fundraising advantage, a dramatic fundraising advantage as well. And there's also, and that fundraising advantage continues to the Senate races that Jim was talking about. There are 3 states in which the Democrats are playing defense, and that is Alabama and Doug Jones. God bless him. It's just Alabama is a very difficult state for Democrats. So it may be the fact that he is not able to hang on there. But in Minnesota and in Michigan, the numbers there look very strong. Whereas there are 13 states that Republicans are defending right now. And in each of those 13 states, the Republican running for re-election is below 50% approval rating and below 50% in their re-elect number, and that is never good for an incumbent to be polling below 50%. 3 Democrats are under 50%. 13 Republican seats are under 50%. As Jim laid out, the likeliest wins for Democrats are in the state of Arizona and Colorado. I think both of those races are effectively over. Mark Kelly, the former astronaut, is going to win in Arizona. John Hickenlooper, the former governor of Colorado, is going to win in Colorado. The next tier is the state of North Carolina and the state of Maine, my home state, where both of those races are close. The Democrat is leading by between 3 and 5 points. And then the next tier is Iowa and Montana, where Democratic challengers are fielding strong campaigns there. And that doesn't even include the state of Georgia, where the Democrat is winning in there are two Senate races going on in Georgia right now. The Democrat is winning in both of those races. Unfortunately, each of them is a three-way race. And the rules in Georgia are you have to get at least 50% plus one to win outright. So if you don't, then you have to have a runoff where it's a head-to-head, a mano a mano. And that runoff election is January 5th. So we may not know the outcome and control of the Senate on election night or shortly thereafter. And then I'll just touch real quick on, and again, Democrats need to flip 4 seats to win back the Senate. And I think folks are confident that there are at least 6 targets right now where we are ahead and winning and have a fundraising advantage, have a spending advantage, have an advertising advantage, and have an enthusiasm advantage. And then on the House, I know Jim thinks that there may be a universe in which that the House, the Democrats or Republicans win back the House. Right now, the generic congressional polls show that Democrats lead an average of +7 in the swing states, which translates into a 5 to 10 seat Democratic gain. So the House looks like the House is also in very good shape. But we're going to see. We're going to count the votes. We're going to see what happens on election night, and then how soon thereafter we'll know the outcome of the election. But it's a fascinating time, a ton of enthusiasm, a ton of early vote, and we shall see who ultimately prevails. But at this moment, I would rather be the Democrat than Donald Trump.
So, Kevin, I just wanted to throw out a couple of real quick data points for y'all to consider and watch on Tuesday. One is all those polls told Hillary Clinton that she would be president 4 years ago, and they were clearly wrong. 2, President Trump is doing better amongst Hispanics than he did in 2016. And amongst the African American community, he's doubling his vote share of what he had in 2016. And then the final is the Republicans out-registered Democrats in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and Florida over the last 4 years. So there are more Republican votes in those 4 states now than there were 4 years ago. So those numbers may come back to haunt Mr. Webster and his colleagues when they wake up with a very blurry head and headache and blurry eyes on Wednesday morning.
Okay, so if you two and Hunt were to give me an over-under, okay, of when are we going to know the real result of the election? Is this going to go into next year sometime, or is it going to happen soon and fast?
I think we'll know on late Tuesday night or Wednesday, and God help us if we have to go into December. I was down in Florida in the recount in 2000. Don't want to do it again. It wasn't fun then, and it's going to be less fun now.
Yeah. And I think Todd's points on the Senate runoff are where you could see a question mark on control of the Senate, because if it's down 1, it's all going to boil down to who had coattails on Tuesday night, and then all the money that's going to get poured into a special or potentially 2 specials in Georgia. Really could, that those runoffs would occur first week in January.
Yeah, I've got a question for you. Obviously, being in Florida, so some of the questions I'll have for you from my end or from here. But there was a commentary in the Orlando Sentinel today about our governor, DeSantis, and it brought up points of. I'm not going to get into what about him and things that we're doing, but some of the points that were brought up is about how he is really on the coattails, of Trump, and how many of the other governors, not many, but some of the other governors around the country are actually distancing themselves from Trump and said they wouldn't even vote for him. So I don't know if that's something in your wheelhouse or something you know much about, but that was just brand new news today to me that I read this morning.
It
I'll
depends
take
on
that.
Go ahead, Todd.
Well, yeah, I mean, I will take that, and I will say that I think the Democrats for 4 years have been repulsed and aghast at how this president has handled himself. Not only his personal life, but just how he presides, how he trashes our allies, what he says about our veterans and our military folks. That he's just absolutely appalling, and people are no longer outraged by it because they've sort of become immune to it. But behind the scenes, Republican elected members of Congress shake their heads, but they just see no upside in sticking their head up to criticize Trump because they're afraid that it's going to get cut off. What you've seen in recent weeks where John Cornyn and Ben Sasse and other Republicans have publicly criticized President Trump is a reflection of his political weakness, that they're no longer afraid of Trump because they, I assume, believe that he is no longer politically powerful, but that he also may lose, and that they want to be able to face their children at some point and say that they spoke out against this madman, this absolutely disgraceful human being. So I do think that it is a signal of his political weakness that you have folks like John Cornyn and Ben Sasse and other Republicans who are finally having the political courage to speak out against him.
And I would just add that John Cornyn is speaking out against him because he's actually got a race, which he'll win handily, but he's worried about it. It has nothing to do with his being fed up with Trump. It's called political survival. And Ben Sasse was never a Trumper from the beginning, so that's not a surprise at all. But on those other governors, it's, Larry Hogan right here in Maryland, quasi-Republican, has been quite vocal against the president. And it depends on your state and depends on the voter preferences as to where you're going to be. It's called political survival, period. And people are so fond of the president that they call him all sorts of names like Mr. Webster just did. And they don't realize that there's a lot of people, including people like me, who are veterans, that do not believe he said those words. And there's substantial support still amongst the military community for the president, and maybe even more so than there was 4 years ago.
Very cool. I've got a question from one of our members, Amy Smith. She said she hears that Republicans traditionally come out, and vote on Election Day, which you've already brought that point up already, other than COVID. What are the reasons for this?
It's a difference in philosophy. Me personally, I vote on Election Day, and I've never. The only time I voted absentee was when I was deployed overseas. But it's from a Republican perspective, that Election Day is very important to cast it live. And I think there's a conservative bent there as well, because if I cast my vote 30 days before election and somebody gets run over by a bus, my vote is no longer has import. So that's, I think, the two main reasons is you like doing it in person, you like coming out of that booth, and you don't want to cast your vote before the die is fully cast.
I think Democrats want to vote, and they're voting early because they're so motivated, because they are so they are eager to cast a vote against Donald Trump and to try to repudiate the last 4 years of where he has taken this country, of his behavior, of how he's treated our allies, of how he's treated the Kurds, of how he's treated anybody that is not fawning and obsequious to him. So. I think that's why you're seeing so many Democrats turning out early and absentee voting, and and the other reality is that COVID is now surging again, and it's surging all over the country because we never appropriately masked up. We never took the public health measures that were necessary and that other industrialized countries took to try to get COVID under control, and as a result, it's again spinning out of control.
Which is why those other industrialized countries' positive rates are skyrocketing at a rate great in excess of ours. So
staying on COVID, okay, let me throw something up. So there's been some questions from some of the members I've talked to recently, obviously member companies and sponsor companies that are listening right now too. Is there any discussion in Congress whatsoever about a law that protects companies from being sued due to COVID-19 illnesses or other things? I think that's one reason why some of our member sponsor companies are avoiding travel, because of that fear. So is there work on that?
Absolutely. It's arguably the single biggest priority for House and Senate Republicans. And it's a deal breaker for any COVID-4 package, which is one of the reasons that one was not done before the election. So if there's one that will take place after the election, which I think there will be, it'll be smaller than the last package, depending on the electoral outcome. It should be smaller, but COVID, that liability protection for business, educators, institutions of higher education, et cetera, is a drop dead issue for House and Senate Republicans.
And just from a Democratic standpoint, there are any number of moderate Democrats who also support liability protection and making sure that we can get businesses back open again, and that they have some measure of protection against lawsuits and people getting infected at their place of business.
So another question that came up is the about the mail-ins. So the strong possibility of this election result being challenged, and or do all states have the rule that mail-in ballots must be received by 7 p.m. on election day? Is that a standard pretty much in all states?
No, it varies by state. And there are several court cases pending right now, a couple of which have been resolved, that actually extend the receipt of absentee ballots and early vote ballots as long as they've been postmarked by election day. I think Wisconsin now, they get 6 extra days to receive them. So it varies by state, but it's not uniform.
So in those 6 extra days, then I guess on election night, you see what the results are. That would be used in a recount. Is that what that would end up being?
No, they'll tabulate those, but if it's close, like it was in Florida with the hanging chads in 2000, you've got to count every vote and go down to the wire to determine who won that election. So what people don't realize that in states where the outcome is not close, oftentimes they don't even tabulate the absentees until later on, because it's not a big deal. It doesn't have an impact. It's where it's close that they've got to count every single one of those to determine the outcome.
Cool.
So they'll know. And sorry, real quick, and they'll know which votes are out. Right, they're going to know who's already voted. They're going to know who has yet to vote, and the partisan affiliation. If somebody is a registered Democrat, they'll know that Todd Webster's ballot is still out, and they can extrapolate from that how that vote might come in. But in the state of Maine, for example, there's a million voters, 478,000 absentee ballots have been requested, and so far about 250,000 Democratic ballots have been returned, and about 100,000 Republican ballots have been returned. And the rest are unaffiliated voters, independent voters.
Cool. Well, this will be one last question, and we're going to go to Brad Nelson. But you two, all three of you, actually stay on, because when we're done with Brad and his talk about what the hotel industry is going on, and especially Marriott, then we'll want to come back and have all of us together to talk about some of those things. But the final question is, I know that there's closures of restaurants in Europe that's happened here recently, France and others. And lockdown, I guess, in England as well. States in the United States, I know that California, there's been some serious talk about it out there, especially for indoor dining and just having, dining outside. Are there many other states right now that are really looking at possibly doing that? Because that's very important to everybody that's on this webinar.
Yeah, I think without a doubt there are. And I think it's much more... that concept is much more receptive in blue states than it is in red states. And so I would look to the blue states that have actually, by the way, have the highest infection rates and mortality rates as those that will reinstate some of these draconian measures that, pardon the pun, the cure may be worse than the disease for the economy and for small business owners across the country.
Todd? Hi.
Yeah, I mean, it's a state by state decision, obviously, and the governors in those states know best what is best for their state. And and if you have a relative who has had COVID, or if you've had a family member who's died of COVID, you may have a different perspective than if you haven't. But clearly, the response has not been as strong or as thorough or as nationwide as it could have been. And I think everybody is praying that we get a vaccine quickly and get it out to market quickly, and make sure that it's been validated and tested and that it's been approved by medical experts and not political experts.
Yeah, there's this constitutional principle called federalism, that we've been operating on for about 240 years, and that power has devolved to the states for a reason. We don't have a king, contrary to what some folks would like you to portray the current president.
Cool. Anything to add before Brad comes on?
No, I think I'll let Brad take over and look forward to the later discussion.
Thank you all for having us.
Yeah, well, hang in because we'll be right back to you. Yeah, so Brad, you're in an interesting place in this entire globe, and that's what's interesting too. It's beyond our country and our border with all the properties that you have worldwide. So, why don't you share with the group a little bit about the depth of the types of multiple types of hotels
Sure.
you have all over the world, and what's working and where the challenges are.
Sure, happy to. I will just tell you, that was a fascinating conversation, gentlemen, and I felt like I was flipping back from MSNBC to Fox. So thank you for that. And actually, I wanted to jump in, but I'm going to try and keep this to hotels and to occupancy and to food and beverage, because the one thing we do know, no matter if you're red or blue, everybody eats and everybody wants to go out and enjoy great restaurants and great food and whatnot. And COVID has probably attacked no other industry harder than hospitality, leisure, travel, so on and so forth. And so for us, we really look at this as really just kind of a crisis of human life in large regard. And we've only got a few minutes, so I don't want to go through all the history or whatnot, but we saw this back in late December, early January, in China. And obviously, actually we have a number of hotels in Wuhan. And nobody, thought that we were going to be experiencing what we were going to be experiencing, but we did have a SARS-like concern, having been through SARS, and actually I was traveling through Asia during SARS. And so as we look at kind of the impact, we don't have to go through, what the impact of the world is, but we always look towards, what is China doing? We've got a number of hotels in China. I think we've got, through Asia Pacific, we've got, well over almost 1,000, and that's our largest area of growth with 840 projects on the books for the next couple of years. So what we've actually kind of looked at is, what has China done? What can we learn from that? How does that affect the rest of the world? And a couple of things. One, we actually can't address it the way China did because for the reasons both gentlemen just kind of stated. And they have been very successful, but successful in a way that we probably can't get to. We do know that through the things that we've seen over the number of months, what started out first is kind of a focus on cleaning, a focus on virus killing practices and whatnot. And everybody, wash your hands and all of that. And that absolutely is valid. But what we also have learned, and we actually kind of knew this early on, is that much of the cleaning aspects around electrostatic sprayers, around visual cleaning and all that is critically important. But it's really critically important also from a standpoint of confidence, that there is visual addressing of the virus and whatnot. What we do know is the real transmission of virus is more aerosoled, is more controlled by protection of aerosol transmission through masks, through distancing. The two words that everybody now is so longing to stop using are social distancing. But that, in effect, is what is the biggest threat to the restaurants and to travel and to hotels and to large gatherings and whatnot, is that we are kind of built on bringing people together. We are built on people being in activated spaces. Nobody wanted to go into a restaurant that had 25% occupancy in the old days. You would look in the windows and is anybody in there? Well, if nobody's in there, I don't want to go in. Now that's kind of flipped. And we're saying, okay, well, it's not crowded, so let's go in. We can sit apart from each other. But if you've been out a number of times during this time, and most people have been doing kind of what I've been doing, is hanging out here in my home and doing Zoom calls, right? it is an entirely different experience, and it's really kind of affecting hospitality. So from a pure experiential point, there's a lot that we in the industry can do. There's a lot of focus on outdoor dining. Thank goodness this hit its crescendo, its first crescendo in spring. And now as we go into winter, outdoor dining in Napa Valley is awesome any time of the year, but it's not as great in Detroit or Chicago or Toronto. And that's really our challenge. And the other factor is, just having restaurants stay alive. So that's kind of the restaurant industry, which we are a huge part of. As Marriott Hotels and Resorts, and we have 30 brands, and thankfully we have 30 brands because that gives us diversification across the spectrum and across the globe, and that's been no more important than it is now. But within those 30 brands and within how we actually manage, there's a couple things that we really are dependent upon. One, again, that is travel and group. This group here, I was lucky enough to attend a few events, but thrilled to have attended an immersion a couple of years ago with Kevin and many of the members on the team here. And I can't imagine a world in which people can't get together and go travel and experience and see things firsthand. So the broader message is we will, this will be at some point controlled. But within the 30 brands in the different countries, we do look towards kind of the trends and what's going on. And I think while China itself, in some cases is some of our restaurants and some of the food and beverage operations there are actually 50% over last year, so over pre-COVID in terms of their numbers. Asia is a little bit of a different food and beverage experience because most of the hotels are the central local food and beverage operations that people go to. It's not quite as independently operated as many of the other countries. But the concern that we really have is now looking towards Europe. And I just saw this morning, and I think somebody mentioned it earlier, that France and Germany have put a little stricter lockdowns. And the first thing that they kind of address are restaurants. If a restaurant is 25%, in my mind, there's really no need to do any lockdowns in a restaurant because you are already spread out. And in some cases, I think restaurants like airlines are really trying to over-index on what we are doing with masks and distancing and whatnot. So unfortunately, this is one of the target industries that is the first to take the brunt. It's also one of the target industries that unfortunately has gotten such poor support in terms of bailout, whatever you want to call it. And Jim, I've been with you for 40 years. Todd, I just joined you, but I'm not sticking around too long. But we've got to fix that. And I think there's a lot that we're still learning. There's a big concern really on how are we going to handle the second wave. I completely agree that we're not going to get back into a full-on lockdown, but the impact on restaurants and the impact on bars and the impact on travel and the impact on conferences continues to be severe for us. I could go on and on. So I know we only have a few minutes left because we got about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that we cover some things. I think so. There's a lot of questions that we all have. Well, what do we do about all that? So as individual hotels or as brands, what do we do about that? As restaurants, as restaurateurs, what do we do about that? Well, there's a couple of things that we can look towards. One is we know the first place that really our business was impacted again was the large conferences. We think about the National Restaurant Association show that's in every year in May. Been there for years, and it's kind of a tradition. I know people that have attended that for 30 years in a row, for 35 years in a row. There's one right there. I can't count how many I've attended, but I rarely have missed any since the early 90s, late 80s even. So maybe I guess I'm in that number as well. But it's so much more beyond just a conference, and we've got hotels and we've got locations that are built for that. Orlando, Las Vegas, Anaheim, brands like our Gaylord brand, which is a phenomenal destination resort brand of 5 hotels now, and with some good growth potential. And actually, we're still planning on continuing to grow that brand and grow those locations. But without conferences and conventions of thousands of people, and the food and beverage and meeting support and all the jobs that go with that, it's very difficult to keep things moving and to keep the investment targeted towards those locations. The flip side of that is our select brands, which are the smaller hotels. We call them select. Maybe they're less full service, but still have some food and beverage. In some cases, it's part of the room rate breakfast and whatnot. These are the hotels where you can drive to and that are kind of on the way. And those obviously have taken a lot of business and gotten a lot of business from the switch in travel of getting on an airplane to more jumping in a car and doing road trips. I actually did a road trip over the summer. Maybe I could talk about that kind of at the end and some of the things I saw. But those hotels have done quite well, and those hotels have occupancy that is exceeding, in some cases 50%. We're seeing a bit of a drop off now, but it's been progress up until now. The middle is where we still continue to see great support. If it's a resort, if we think about some of the resorts in Florida, if you've got a beach or a golf course, you can and you can drive to it. We're doing well there. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. And while we're quite confident and hopeful that whether it's vaccine, therapeutics, mask as a part of outfits, whatever, that people will, and people are clamoring to get out of their house. That said, they're clamoring with either wanton abandon and saying this is a hoax, and I believe what I'm hearing on whatever stations I'm watching, and nothing can happen, and we're just going to live with it. Or you've got people that are saying, I'm not going anywhere until I know more and can be safe. There's very little room in the middle. And so we're hoping for the middle. How does all that, so actually, sorry, the earlier conversation almost got me on kind of a political piece. But so how do we really think about, what happens in food and beverage and what are the things that we can see? So what has happened is there's been a huge speed up towards technology, a huge speed up towards contactless. We're doing some things, exploring some things of kiosks, of things that are more Zoom-like in terms of interaction in hotels, either from guest room check-ins and keyless entry and phone generated keys to QR codes on menus. And out of that, actually, there will be some things that are really going to be kind of cool. And I think that have been kind of on the peripheral for many years. The idea of getting everything QR code from your menu standpoint, just a simple thing as a cost control, to be able to say, I'm no longer going to worry about the look and feel, the menu cover, the printing, the cleaning. I'm going to put everything on a QR code, and you're going to read it on your phone. I can still make it artistic. That suddenly, is kind of interesting. Now, a little scary to the menu design companies in the world, but that's really interesting. The flexibility that gives you. You no longer have to say, I can only change my menu twice a year because I got to print it. The ability to communicate and the ability to order. I think the DoorDash, the delivery, Grubhub, Uber Eats, all of that has been coming for a long time. It was obviously entrenched in two areas, entrenched in fast food and entrenched in the kind of the highly populated urban areas where you could just order from the restaurant down the street and order from many restaurants down the street, and it would come up to you. That is something that is interesting. It's interesting to hotels. but it also has logistic challenges, and which is why in many cases, the best way is to approach that is through a ghost kitchen, because you can build it purposely to have access for delivery. If I think about a lot of the ghost kitchen opportunities in hotels, for example, you would think we've got all these empty kitchens. The empty kitchen is not the issue. What the issue is getting the driver to wherever the empty kitchen preparation place is taking place, and making that is not such a set of hurdles for them to come and get your delivery. And if you think about it, many of our hotels have large porte-cocheres and large back docks, and the kitchens are floors away and could be a 10-minute hike to the kitchen. That does not work for ghost kitchens. So there's a lot happening, I think, in a large regard. We are pushing forward many of the technology solutions that were in place already. I think with every crisis, having been through, several crises in the hotel industry, all the way back to the 1990 savings and loan crisis, which was more of a real estate crisis that impacted hotels and actually created Marriott in a management company as we are now. We always find a way to come out of it with a different perspective than we went into it, with a very entrepreneurial kind of spirit to survive. And that will happen here. The unfortunate thing through all of this is that there are 3 places in the world that you don't want to be in, according to many of our experts. And that's a nursing home, a cruise ship, and a bar. Whether that's true or not, the first place is, it really disturbed me when I read this morning that Germany has decided to close all restaurants and bars. So that is part of our big challenge. And I agree with the gentleman earlier that we're not going to go into a broad lockdown. But I can also tell you the partisanship through this has been astounding. And just a real quick story, and I'll leave a couple minutes for questions, Kevin. But I live in Virginia. I grew up in Seattle, worked in California for many years. My daughter finished her college here in Virginia over the spring, and wanted to get back to Seattle and got a job. So I drove her and I drove from Virginia to Seattle in mid-September. And one of the stark things that I found was that you'd be shocked at how much parity there were in signage for either candidate, and not surprising, the places that were the biggest concern for the two of us to make sure that we were wearing masks because nobody else were, are actually the states that today are having the biggest percentage increase. So I had a phenomenal breakfast on a Sunday morning in Mitchell, South Dakota, with my daughter at a Perkins, which was the best choice in town. And it was after church on a Sunday morning, and we were the only ones. Of course, we were also driving a Volkswagen Beetle with Washington tags on it, so we looked like complete outsiders. But nobody else was wearing a mask, and both of us were like, you know what, this can't be good. So long and short, we in the industry and we in hotels, we decided to, have a mask requirement to come into our hotels, as we believe in that. This pandemic has been projected, and unfortunately, in this case, this one actually stuck. Others could have H1N1. We did much of the work we did around H1N1 we used in the early days in terms of our response. So this is not the last pandemic. This was not the first pandemic, but this is the one that actually, because of travel, probably got across the globe and is where it is. So I've kind of gone all over across the board. I apologize, Kevin.
No, it's great.
I'm sure I didn't answer any questions that are actually meaningful to the audience here, but I'd love to take any or have any questions that come in. And
it was great. I'll ask the first question to kind of bring everybody in and back together. But, probably a question that we would all have is, so what is going to happen now, in Congress? And I know there's a difference between who gets in office, the presidency here in the next week. But, what is going to happen with tax breaks, incentives on industries that really need it, and hotels being obviously one of them. Hotels, restaurants that we all represent. I know there has to be some sympathy, within all sides of Congress on, their particular states or, whatever their role is within that of these industries that are so vital to the future of our country and to employment everywhere. I'm sure they're doing things to do it. Is how they decide where the money's going to go. I mean, who's going to get it? It's going to come to the hotels or restaurant industry, or is it going to be something that's broad and will take in every kind of manufacturing, opportunity? Because obviously food manufacturing is a big part of that as well.
It is.
It's again, I think that a COVID-4 package is likely post-election. The most immediate thing that could be done is there's $130 billion in PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program money that is frozen because it expired. So allowing that to be obligated. And there's, I think, $400 billion in the Treasury program that has also lapsed. And so getting those two out the door are going to be vital, and I think are a priority for both sides of the aisle. The question is, what other items beyond that and liability protection gets added to a package, and where you find the balance between where the House is and where the Senate is and where the White House thinks they are, which changes on a daily basis.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there is, I would also say that there was a COVID-4 package that was passed by the House back in May, about $3 trillion, but it had spending that Senate Republicans were not comfortable with. So what the Senate Republicans were comfortable doing back in September was about an additional $300 billion. So you're going to see that rub, I think, post-election. Democrats are going to want to spend more, to put more money, particularly in state and local, because states and localities have also seen their budgets crippled with lower tax revenue and the potential of having to lay off first responders and police and firefighters and folks like that. So the day after the election, there will that debate will resume. But I do think that there is bipartisan sympathy for the restaurant industry writ large, the travel and tourism industry. And that there are good men and women of both political parties who recognize that there is an acute need to provide help. But I think it's also a fact that there are you're going to see Republicans primarily talking about fiscal austerity, fiscal responsibility. The fact that the federal national debt has increased by $7 trillion in the last 4 years. $3 trillion of that was COVID related, but $4 trillion of it was the tax policy that was put through in 2018. So we now have a $28 trillion debt, and I think that in a crisis you do have to deficit spend. But mark my words that after the election, particularly if Democrats take over the Congress and the administration, that you're going to hear fiscal responsibility from our Republican friends much more full-throatedly.
Great. Hey, Brad, this is a question for you. This is from some members. They've been traveling, obviously, and staying in Marriott properties. And the question was, when do you see offering, the full food and beverage, across all brands coming back? Because you and I had a long conversation about this. But
yeah. So one of the unfortunate parts of this whole scenario is that survival was first, and survival meant many things. And one of the things that it meant was that and it wasn't just us, it was all of our competitors and partners in this world. But we really took a hard look at what standards were and said, listen, you need to survive. And we had hotels that part of survival was to really kind of strip bare some of the offerings that were part of the normal offering. And food and beverage was a big piece of that. Our focus now is that as we are coming back and as people are coming back, they have to come back, to a sense of hospitality. Now, in the beginning, and even throughout all this, I think our customers have been incredibly patient and incredibly understanding that the world is different. All the restaurants aren't necessarily open. But we're really looking at now, there is a limit to that patience, particularly when rates and whatnot are more similar as well than they were. So we're really, we really look at it as an occupancy play, but it's a very wide range of occupancy because there's a lot of other factors. And it's also sustained occupancy. One of the challenges that I think we have is leisure travel has been incredibly, higher, but leisure is more weakened. And so you could be at 60%, 80% even at hotels in Florida that were running, 90% last weekend, and then they dropped down to 15%. Restaurants, you can't just turn a switch and turn it on, turn it off. You need to bring people, you need to bring product, you need to buy food, and you need to make sure we use food. So I think one of the things that we're really doing is going back and saying, listen, the future is not like the past. You need to really take a couple of actions. And one is simplify for execution and kind of go back to the basics a little bit, but make sure you can execute across the business varieties that you have. And that means reducing menus and right-sizing menus. It means that you really need to stand for something and your identity matters, and it matters. And if you have a concept, you've got to make sure that concept remains and it's targeted and it's purposeful and it has its integrity. And you need to understand that the changing service model is going to be what we come out of this with. And that might be that there are fewer large shareable platters, and that the dining experience may be less communal. And there may be more space even after this when people are comfortable. I mean, I think we all loved the business aspect of cramming people in a restaurant, but I don't know that every diner loved having their elbows touching as they were drinking a glass of wine. And then I think the other real piece out of this is that no matter what, the young will win in this. And what I mean by that is the impact of COVID has shown the world the impact on society and on on climate and on its environment. And ESG will actually survive out of this and come out bigger. And if you're not actually focusing on environmental, societal, and government regulation and food waste and traceability of product and whatnot, you will not survive. So out of this, people remember clear skies in Beijing. They remember, although it was probably fake pictures, dolphins in Venice, but the clear waters in Venice. And they remember, things like, the algae bloom coming out of Lake Okeechobee every year. The impact of human on the environment and its relation to food and beverage, in my opinion, is stronger. The straw debate is not going to go away, even though I know that a lot of my colleagues joked about straws. Straws are real. People's impact on the community are real. And my last bit of soapbox is that what this has done to the community of individuals whose backs the restaurant industry is built on, our dishwashers, our waiters, our servers, our prep cooks, our cooks that are working 2 or 3 jobs, that has been impactful. And I think that we need to do better by them. And we need to thank them. And those are the people that are sitting out. Of the 11 million people out of unemployment, I think 8.8 are restaurant and hotel workers.
That was great, Brad. Yeah, great answer to that. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and I'm gonna, these are things I sometimes wish we could go on and on and on. But to have a great regard for all of your time here as all of you speakers, I want to thank you very much. Thanks, Brad, Todd, Jim, Hunt. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you for what you were doing here in the background with videos as well. But also thanks to all of our members and sponsors who are on this. We really appreciate that. And without you, we couldn't do any of this. So we're going to close out with a little video and say thanks. And we'll see you in 2 weeks, November 11th, with a little whiskey tasting. And Simon Majumdar and Brian Malarkey will be with us.